This is University Lecture. Welcome to another in a series of lectures given on the campus of Iowa State University in Ames. Today, Sandra Wabanaskaum, an Indian student from Minnesota, will speak on the topic Red Power and Termination. This is the seventh in a series of 9 programs recorded at Iowa State University's National Affairs Institute devoted to the American Indian. Miss Wabanaskaum.
I am from the Menominee, Oneida, and Stockbridge-Munsee tribes of northern Wisconsin. The Menominee tribe is located around Green Bay. It's 60 miles northwest of Green Bay, Wisconsin. It is made up of virgin timberland. It's one of the most beautiful wild spots left in the Midwest. The Wolf River runs through it. The Wolf River is declared one of the 4 wild rivers left in the Midwest. In 1634, Pierre Nicolet, a Frenchman, discovered the Menominees at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. And the Menominees taught the French how to trap and how to live like woodland peoples, and the French intermarried with the Menominees. And the French prospered and the Menominees prospered. And so the legends went on, and some of the legends died. And I'd like to read you one of the legends that to some Menominees it's coming true, to others there is a revival. It is the legend of Spirit Rock. Spirit Rock is a very symbolic monument to the Menominee people. One night long ago, a Menominee Indian dreamed that Manabush, the grandson of Koko Mosesanow, the earth, and part founder of the Metawin, or Medicine Society, this God invited him to feast out in the woods and then to go on a fast. With 7 of his friends, this Menominee warrior went out, and they had their fast and they had a vision, all 7 of them. And this one warrior asked for everlasting life, and Manabush became very angered and said, I will give you everlasting life. You will be changed into a rock. And the rock was formed, and it was formed in the shape of a man. And the legend says that kindly spirits come to offer tobacco to this rock. And that when this rock crumbles away, the Menominee tribe will be extinct. The Menominees, just like all the other Indian tribes that you've been hearing about in the last few days, were subjugated and kept oppressed under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But the Menominees were a very peaceful and enduring people. They were a very well-organized tribe. And they prospered well off the land that the white men thought they wouldn't prosper off. The state of Wisconsin moved the Menominees into this densely forested area. The white men thought no human being can live here. But little did they know that the Menominees were a woodland tribe and that they survived out of this kind of environment and that their culture came from this environment. And so the Menominees built themselves a hospital, and they built themselves a lumber mill, And they had their own electric company and their water company and their telephone company. And this tribe consisted of 3,270 enrolled members. Before I go on, I'd like to give my opinion on tribal membership qualifications. It seems that the BIA is living on this old blood theory myth, that it's blood that carries your hereditary characteristics. I think the BIA is pretty goddamn far behind its times when it can't realize that it's genetics that makes up your human characteristics. And so they come along with this 1/4 degree blood in order to be enrolled in a tribe. I'm not an enrolled Menominee myself. I'm an enrolled Oneida. My mother is a full-blooded Oneida, and my father is Menominee and Stockbridge Munsee. And because of the paternalistic society of the Menominees, we have always gone the Menominee way. I miss being on the Menominee rolls by 1/32, if that means anything. Anyway, to get back to what I'm trying to lead up to, the Menominees were declared one of the richest tribes in the United States. Now, they didn't compare the Menominees to the general population, to the American society. They compared them to other tribes. And from what you've heard this week by these various Indian activists, Indian leaders, BIA people, the Indians of America, or the Native Americans today, aren't that wealthy. And so the Menominees were considered one of the richest tribes, but still they were a very poor people, economically poor. In 1908, a large windstorm went through the reservation, and it damaged a lot of the forest land. And the Department of Conservation, which is the Department of Natural Resources today because they don't have anything to conserve anymore, didn't salvage this timber. They let it rot. And so in 1935, the Menominees placed 13 claims in the United States courts. And they won their battle in the courts, and they won their lawsuit for $8,500,000. They already had $2 million in the United States Treasury, so that left them with $10 million, their own tribal industry, and all these other things that I had mentioned. So they look pretty good amongst the other Indian tribes. And in 1947, Commissioner Zimmerman of the Bureau of Indian Affairs introduced into Congress the termination policy. And I'd like to read you a definition of termination. Termination refers to that policy which was officially adopted by the federal government in the 1950s, freeing the Indian from the federal government or from the paternalism of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It amounts to an end to the special status of the Indian, and with it an end to the trusteeship and protection which marked the previous government policy. The Menominees were among the first of the tribes to be terminated. There is a lot of question about why the Menominees were terminated. The Menominees were given a sawmill back in about the 1850s. And the federal government thought they weren't going to do any good, but the Menominees came out on top. So that kind of angered the BIA. Also, the BIA and the federal government were also angry at the Menominees because they had the audacity to sue in a white man's court. And Senator Watkins, who was a goddamn racist from Utah, got up and said, well, if these Menominees are smart enough to sue in a white man's court, then they should be terminated. Now, I just read that termination meant that an Indian loses his special status. In other words, the Bureau of Indian Affairs can say that once a tribe is terminated, they are no longer Indians. And their land becomes taxable. This is what is called equality. This summer, I was up in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the American Indian Movement's Indian Village. And one night I was really upset with a few things there up in Minneapolis after seeing some of the racism and housing up there. And I was asked to get up and give a little talk by Mr. Dennis Banks, who's a former co-chairman of AIM. And I was asked, what is equality to the Menominees? What is this equality that's supposed to be brought out in termination? Equality means that your land is taxed. Equality means that you're put back into the cycle of poverty. Equality means that you're no longer an Indian, that you're a tribal corporation, and that you adapt a white man's system of government. That's what equality is. Equality is starvation. Equality is closing down a hospital so that people have to go 20 miles to be taken care of medically. It means that if you're in an accident, you have to wait 20 minutes for an ambulance to get there, about another 10 minutes for them to get you inside the ambulance, and another 20 minutes to get you back to the hospital. By the time you get there, you're dead. It means that women end up having babies in cars. That's what termination is. All this bullshit, all this rhetoric, this academic rhetoric of explaining what is termination. I was only 11 years old when it came about. And I was sitting at the supper table, and my father came home from the lumber mill where he had worked for about 20 years, ever since he was the age of 16. And he said, "You kids, you know what?" He said, "Tonight we're eating supper here and we're sitting on this land, and we've lived here all the while, and I built a home here. And tonight I own this land. Tonight this is Menominee land. But tomorrow I'm going to have to start saving up some money to buy this land if I want to stay here, if I want to keep my home." And he said, "Today I can call myself an Indian, and the government recognizes me as an Indian, but tomorrow I'm not an Indian anymore." As an 11-year-old child, I didn't know what in the hell to do. We couldn't even eat supper that night. And the next day we got to school and everybody was talking about it. Some people said, "Why, it's the best thing that could happen to us." Some people, about 60% of them said, "What is this termination?" Some people said, "I don't like it." One man said, "The federal government is like a steamroller. Once it sets up its mind to knock something down, it doesn't stop, and it knocks everything in its path over. And when the federal government made up its mind in 1947 to terminate the Menominees and the Klamath and other tribes, they didn't stop. They went all the way. There's 3,270 Menominees that have voting rights. And in 1950, Senator Watkins from Utah came to the Menominee Reservation and met with 150 people, with 150 Menominees who wanted to split up this $8 million per capita. They wanted a $1,500 payment. And Watkins said, listen, if you want $1,500, you also have to accept termination. And when you're so goddamn poor that your children are starving and they look nothing but like skin and bones, and you haven't got any food for the next week, you're going to vote for $1,500 because that means some food on the table and some clothes for your kids. And so these 150 who really didn't understand what termination was voted for $1,500. But Senator Watkins had put a joker in the deck, and that was termination. And the federal government accepted this 150-member vote for a per capita payment as a request for the Menominee people to terminate. I can remember a few years ago, every time I'd go out to speak, other Indians would raise their hand and they'd say, is it not true that the Menominees wanted termination? According to the mass media, the Menominees wanted termination. Everybody made it look like the Menominees raised their right hand and said, yes, we want our lands to be taxed. We want to be put back into poverty. In 1961, this terrible, unconstitutional act was brought to the Menominee people on the midnight of April 31st. And at that time, the Menominees were formed into a tribal corporation. And their lumber mill, which was formerly called Menominee Indian Mills, was now termed Menominee Enterprises Incorporated. And their former tribal council was formed into a seven-board member of county supervisors. And the Menominees were given 100 shares each, and a shareholder certificate. But like the BIA and its kind of attitudes towards Indians, they said, well, you know, these Menominees can't run around with 100 shares all by themselves. Somebody has to take care of this money for them and has to take care of their enterprises. So the federal government said, we think that you Menominees should form a voting trust to handle the votes of all the incompetent people. And so out of First Wisconsin Trust in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, came the Voting Trust. And right after termination, this voting trust held 47% of the votes, and those 47% were the Menominees who were under the age of 21 or were too old or who were illiterate and could not read or write or speak in English. And so since the Menominees' lands were taxed and the enterprises was the only source of income for the entire county, and since the county was being burdened with welfare, maintenance of the county, running of the lumber mill, trying to retain its hospital, electricity, water, and all these other facilities, the Menominee, the board of directors at Menominee Enterprises decided that they should sell some Menominee land. And so they had a meeting. My father was there. And this First Wisconsin Trust came in. And they said, we have been informed that this county is going very deep in debt. And so we have chosen a piece of land to be developed into an artificial lake. Can you imagine building an artificial lake in the midst of 82 natural lakes? How asinine can people be? Naturally, the Menominees rejected the goddamn plan. They said no. But First Wisconsin Trust got up with their 47% votes and said, yes, we want to develop this land. We want to start selling. And so Legend Lake was created, a white man's legend. And they came along with names for different parts of the lake, like Soaring Eagle Heights, Swan Dive, Whooping Crane, Standing Bear Rock. Some white men probably named those places. Annie Isaacson from Reedsburg, Wisconsin was the developer of this lake. Menominees call it Leaky Lake, or they call it Fake Lake. And they have a bumper sticker out that says, Legend Lake does not hold water. And this has proved to be true. Just last week I called up a Mrs. Sanford Fowler from Neopet, Wisconsin, who is very active in demonstrations and protests up there, and said that they found that in two neighboring lakes around Fake Lake, that the water has risen. And these two lakes, these two natural lakes. And so they sent the Department of Natural Resources in there and charged Annie Isaacson with the fact that his lake was unsound, ecologically unsound. And the Department of Natural Resources came back to the Menominees and said, no, his lake is okay. You know, what's a little drainage? And out on the other lakes, some of the places were leased. And there's a very, very beautiful lake up there. It was called Mashaquet Lake. And every 4th of July, all the Menominees would gather out there and they would have picnics. And you could go clear across the lake. Little kids could go way across there. You didn't have to worry about sinking in mud or drowning, you know, these kind of things. And after they started letting white men get out on that lake, they built cesspools and all these kinds of things around their homes, and all of a sudden, this lake, the bottom of it starts getting fertile, and this marsh starts growing up inside of it, and the bottom of the lake gets deeper. And you can't, when you open your eyes under the water, you can't see, and you kind of run into people every once in a while, bang each other's legs and hit somebody on the head and things like that. Anyway, Legend Lake, other people say, it's nothing but a cesspool. Another developer said that in about 5 years, the lake will be nothing but a mud flat. Annie Isaacson isn't just exploiting the Menominee people by selling Menominee land, he's also exploiting his own people. White man's greed. He'll exploit anybody, even his own mother. And so he's got these people, these non-Indians, non-tribal members coming in and buying lots on this lake for $2,000, $4,000. It depends whether you got some trees on your land, whether you're close to the lake or not. Anyway, with the development of this lake, last summer, on 4th of July, the Menominees didn't go out to Mashawquet Lake. They went to Legend Lake. And they started protests. And they carried signs and they demonstrated. And some of them were arrested. And there's a man up in the county whose name is George Knote, who is supposed to be a Menominee, but who is the main person who was involved in the development of this lake along with Annie Isaacson. Well, anyway, some little kids threw some rocks at him because they thought he really stunk. And instead of taking it out on these little kids, which would have been really stupid too, he turned around and charged the demonstrators with obscenity. And so 7 Menominees were arrested because they sat down. They weren't going to let anybody arrest them. And they were taken to court. And when they got to court, they said, we don't want a trial here. This judge that you gave us is too goddamn prejudiced. And so they put these Menominees on bond and they let them go. And then in the middle of the summer, they had another trial for them. They had the same judge who signed an injunction against them, prohibiting them from demonstrating or picketing. And so with all this turmoil up there, an organization was formed, and it's called DRUMS, Determination of Rights and Unity for Menominee Stockholders. This organization was formed for the purpose of projecting the truth and investigating the enterprises. A young lady by the name of Connie Deere asked if she could go in and look at the records, which is her right as a shareholder, and they wouldn't let her inside the building. If you got up and asked a question at a meeting, people would just bullshit you and send you from one committee to another or from one person to another, and you never got an answer. And so the last time that I was home, there was a very large meeting with about this many people in the gymnasium of a Catholic school up there. And the Menominees really had it out with their own people. I usually don't like to call another Indian an apple or a radish or a sellout or a rubber stamp or whatever in the hell else they call them. But when somebody actually sells your entire tribe down a river, and the only time that he claims to be an Indian is when he can get some money, then I say he is a goddamn apple. Maybe it's not his fault, because all he's ever been taught in school is the 3 W's. White reading, white arithmetic, etc. There are 4 schools up in the county. There's 2 Catholic schools and 2 public schools. Originally, there was only 1 public school. They had all non-Indian teachers in there who weren't degreed. Shawano County is right next to us, and it's a very rural type area. Wisconsin is very much like Iowa. It's very rural. And so we used to always get this story when we'd say that we were getting a poor education. They'd say, "What you griping about? We get the same rotten deal you guys do." But I can remember, when you go to Shawano, you'd pick up a book that said discard from, say, St. Peter and Paul School in Green Bay. Then you'd get to Menominee County and the Catholic school, and it would say discard St. Peter and Paul. Underneath that, it would say discard Sacred Heart School, Shawano, and it ended up in our school. And so we got a 4th-rate education. And sometimes you didn't even get educated. The priest exploited you and had you make little beaded rosary cases. He was trying to promote the Menominee culture. And you had to make 3 of these goddamn little rosary cases every day. Otherwise, you got sent home and you had to do beadwork at night. You told that you had to do spelling or arithmetic or geography or history. You had to make some rosary cases for God, for the church. And so, as one old Menominee lady said, she said, "I'm old, and when I was young, I was oppressed." And I'm old, and I'm afraid, and I'm oppressed. And I'm tired of being afraid, and I'm tired of being oppressed. She was an old lady. And then a young Menominee woman got up and said, "I have been called dissident, and I have been called a communist and a radical and a militant. But if all those things mean fighting for treaty rights, for red power, for the right to be treated as a human, then I pray to the Great One, to Manitou, to make me the most militant of all." And you better damn well believe that there's a lot of militant Menominees who aren't sitting back anymore. And they're signing their proxies, and they're going to abolish this voting trust. And they're fighting it out in the courts. They haven't been violent. They've been demonstrating, and they've been picketing. And this is only for publicity, to get other tribes to recognize that termination is bad, that it is a threat to your existence, that it is another form of annihilation, extermination. Yes, a long time ago, the Menominees were striving for the same thing that is going on now, for self-determination. But self-determination led to termination. You just can't get ahead, as a lot of people say. They just keep putting you right back in your place. Subjugation. Keep them in their place. Keep their numbers small. Starve them. Let them get in accidents. Have the hospital 20 miles away so that they die on the way. Let this legend come true, that the Menominee race will be extinct. Quite a ways back, about 7 months ago, Time magazine did an article on Goodbye to Tonto. It's a very good article, except for one thing. They said the Menominee race is dead. NET, the National Educational Television Network, put out a very good film, but the title of it was The Last Menominee. Why in the hell do they say things like this? What they're trying to tell you, or trying to make you believe, is that the Indian is a vanishing American, when Indians have the highest rising population in the United States. As of now, it's pretty quiet up there, and since it's pretty cold out and they can't go out by the lake and demonstrate and freeze themselves. But they are working, the Menominee people are working very closely with lawyers, with legislators. Just last week they met with Senator Proxmire. Didn't discuss their problem too much, or their struggle too much. They talked about the other tribes in Wisconsin too, and I would like to talk about what's going on in Wisconsin, since the Midwest is usually kind of left out of this whole Red Power movement, the discussion of it anyway. Last summer in Wisconsin Dells, which is a very, very commercialized area in the southern part of Wisconsin, the Winnebagos were getting pretty tired of being exploited. They have a ceremonial performance down there in Wisconsin Dells, and this is the biggest tourist attraction in the Dells. And the Winnebagos and other tribes that perform in the ceremonial decided to go on strike and to unionize themselves. And they did the same thing. They demonstrated, they picketed, and they got a lot of attention, and they got AIM, the American Indian Movement, and they got NAC, the Native American Committee from Chicago, and they got our group, and they got the Great Lakes Indian Youth Alliance from Lawrence, Michigan. They got close to about 400 Indians to come down there and support them. And then there was the Apostle Islands Lakeshore Plan, introduced into Congress by Senator Nelson about 40 years ago. Senator Nelson really was pushing this. And time again, he would ask the Bad River and Red Cliff bands of Chippewa to be included in this plan and to give up their lands for this park. Now, who in the hell wants to live in the middle of a park? So the Chippewas rejected this. And about 6 times they had to tell the Congress that they didn't want to be included in this bill. And last spring, Senator Nelson came to the University of Wisconsin campus, and there were about 2,000 people out in the audience. And our little group of 7, we were standing way in the back, and we were just holding a sign. On one side of it, we had a poster of Geronimo. On the other side, we had Indians Oppose Apostle Islands Lakeshore Plan. And just by standing there, the cameras automatically came over towards us, and then some people out in the audience said, "Oh, please stop this. We don't want any more violence on the Madison campus." Yeah, 7 Indians were going to cause a lot of violence, weren't we? Anyway, we were invited up to disrupt Senator Nelson's speech by a alderman from the city of Madison. So we got up our nerve, and we had the audacity to go up there and place discredit on the Honorable Senator Gaylord Nelson. I feel that if a man can take credit for things, he can take discredit too. And we were discrediting Senator Nelson for not accepting the Indian word. And we weren't only talking to him, we were talking about all the members of this society who have policy-making power and who never listen to the Indian and who never observe treaty rights power and who constantly break our laws. And we received several phone calls that night that, how could you discredit the Honorable Gaylord Nelson, such a fine man who has contributed so much to this society? Such a man. Anyway, the Chippewas did continue to reject his plan. The bill went through, but they are not included in the plan. But they're so close to that you can bet that tourists are going to go in there and that they're going to move in the Indians' territory and they're going to pollute. Indians are victims of the ecology movement. I also had at that moment the opportunity to say something about Nixon's anti-pollution program and concluded with the statement that every goddamn time Nixon opens his mouth, he pollutes the air. I didn't know this whole thing was live. I was standing up there mouthing off, and I went walking down the street that night, all 7 of us. We had a pretty good victory, so we were celebrating. We went to McDonald's. We had a couple Cokes and wined and dined on some hamburgers and Coke, etc. And all of a sudden, all these people come pouring into this place and said, "Wow, that was just fantastic. You guys really laid it on the line." We said, "Well, you know, we didn't know it got over the air that fast." Somebody said, "It was all live." So we were pretty shocked. We didn't know what to do after that. We thought pretty soon they're going to send a National Guard after 7 Indians. So we all went to Milwaukee that night. And funny thing, Senator Nelson was over there too. So he got it again, only I don't think he recognized us. There's a lot of movement up in Wisconsin. I think it's a pretty good example of the Red Power movement. The Menominees are probably about the most discussed tribe and the most disgusted tribe right now because of the termination policy. And what they're trying to do about it is to have it reconsidered in Congress. They have asked that it be repealed. And in 1968, a petition was sent around the county, and 788 members signed a petition to have this reconsidered in Congress. Now, I'd like to discuss a little bit about Canada. The United States was, or the Native Americans in the United States were introduced to termination one by one. Each tribe was kind of introduced to it, so that there was no national movement to combat this policy. Whereas up in Canada, when the Honorable Jean Chrétien of the Indian Affairs Branch, up there it's the IAB, down here it's the BIA, introduced this new Indian policy, Miss Continetta Horn, who is from the Mohawk tribe and also resides over in Montreal, told me that she was one of the first people to denounce this policy, and that the native peoples up there automatically rejected this. And they have an organization called the National Indian Brotherhood Federation. And this covers all of the territories where natives reside. And also the natives have their tribal councilmen in the provinces of Canada. So being rather well organized, or more organized than the tribes in the States, the Canadian natives were able to combat this termination policy and put a stop to it. And today, this termination policy in Canada has been stopped. But down here in the States, there is no national movement. And the thing that I strive for is to have each of these national organizations, such as United Native Americans, the American Indian Movement, the National Congress of American Indians, the National Indian Youth Council, etc., to get off their asses and start moving to end this policy. And I'd like to read a statement from the President of the United States regarding termination. This act can be repealed or reconsidered, at least in Congress, according to some of the rhetoric of the President. Self-determination without termination. The first and most basic question that must be answered with respect to Indian policy concerns the historic and legal relationship between the federal government and Indian communities. In the past, this relationship has oscillated between two equally harsh and unacceptable extremes. On the one hand, it has at various times during previous administrations be the stated policy objective of both the executive and legislative branches of the federal government eventually to terminate the trusteeship relationship between the federal government and the Indian people. As recently as August of 1953, in House Concurrent Resolution 108, the Congress declared that termination was the long-range goal of its Indian policies. This would mean that Indian tribes would eventually lose any special standing they had under federal law. The tax-exempt status of their lands would be discontinued, federal responsibility for their economic and social well-being would be repudiated, and the tribes themselves would be effectively dismantled. Tribal property would be divided among individual members who would then be assimilated into the society at large. This policy of forced termination, mind you the word forced, is wrong in my judgment for a number of reasons. First, the premises on which it rests are wrong. Termination implies that the federal government has taken on a trusteeship responsibility for Indian communities as an act of generosity toward a disadvantaged people, and that it can therefore discontinue this responsibility on a unilateral basis whenever it sees fit. But the unique status of Indian tribes does not rest on any premise such as this. The special relationship obligations which have been entered into by the United States government, down through the years, through written treaties and through formal and informal agreements, our government has made specific commitments to the Indian people. For their part, the Indians have often surrendered claims to vast tracts of land and have accepted life on government reservations. In exchange, the government has agreed to provide community services such as health, education, and public safety services, which would presumably allow Indian communities to enjoy a standard of living comparable to that of other Americans. This goal, of course, has never been achieved. But the special relationship between the Indian tribes and the federal government, which arises from these agreements, continues to carry on. To terminate this relationship would be no more appropriate than to terminate the citizenship rights of other Americans. In short, the fear of one extreme policy, forced termination, has often worked to produce the opposite extreme, excessive dependence on the federal government. In many cases, this dependence is so great that the Indian community is almost entirely run by outsiders who are responsible and responsive to federal officials in Washington, D.C., rather than to the communities they are supposed to be serving. This is the second of the two harsh approaches which have long plagued our Indian policies. Of the Department of the Interior's programs directly serving Indians, for example, only 1.5% are presently under Indian control. Only 2.4% of HEW's Indian health programs are run by Indians. The result is a burgeoning federal bureaucracy, programs which are far less effective than they ought to be, and an erosion of Indian initiative and morale. I believe that both of these policy extremes are wrong. Federal termination errs in one direction. Federal paternalism errs in the other. Only by clearly rejecting both of these extremes can we achieve a policy which truly serves the best interests of the Indian people. Self-determination among the Indian people can and must be encouraged without the threat of eventual termination. In my view, in fact, that is the only way that self-determination can effectively be fostered. These are the words of President Nixon. I believe that if there were a stronger national movement towards ending or abolishing the termination policies, that the Menominee tribe might be able to have self-determination without termination, and that their way of life could be bettered economically and socially. I just kind of like to end this with a poem that I wrote. It took me about a year to get it together, and it's called "'Twas the Night Before." 'Twas the night before termination, before more land-grabbing, oppression, and starvation. And all through the house, Father said, "Today an Indian, tomorrow we aren't. Tears, fear, and sorrow. Today I own this land, tomorrow I don't. Taxes, buy your land so it can go to the white man's hands." Not a creature was stirring. Winter had just died. Animals of Indian country came to play. Instead, they cried. No more brother, only forgotten corporations, led by once Indian brothers, now radish delegations. Commodities, domestic care packages, now feed the starving noble savages, as they still call us. Venison, deer meat, trout, squirrel, rabbits, berry sweet. Sometimes that's all we ever take, while white land grabbers chew on bloody steak. 20, 30 miles to be schooled, to be used as a mascot, ridiculed. No more beads, no more art, no more game. Take the Indian and make him tame. Sirens dying on the way, all going on in a 20-mile day. Sorry you got here too late. The Kemosabe came too early in 1492. Now it's the natives' fate. Blood, no oxygen, brain scattering, radishes. State officials are chitter-chattering, along with Doc next door, saying, "Close the health house, open it no more." 'Tis now the night past termination. Red power comes to end land grabbing, oppression, and starvation. The radish patch dies. The strong Indian spirit returns in joyful warlike cries. The spirit returns strong. It's time for us to end all that has been wrong. Mr. Foreigner, you think only out of books. Mr. Foreigner, you represent all the crooks. Red power, the forest chants. Now it's the Indians' chance for freedom.
You have been listening to another in a series of lectures given on the campus of Iowa State University in Ames. Today, Sandra Wabanaskaum, an Indian student from Minnesota, spoke on Red Power and student termination. This has been the 7th in a series of 9 programs recorded at Iowa State University's National Affairs Institute devoted to the American Indian. University Lecture is a presentation of Iowa State University Radio.